Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Shebroe, just prior to the break, I asked you if you knew what the code was for the three-way calling off the top of your head. Did you find your cheat sheet to help you?
Yeah.
What is the code for three-way calling?
The code letter, O.
Is there a code for call forwarding?
For call forwarding, the letter, F.
I believe that's all I have.
Mr. Sanger?
Okay, Mr. Shebroe, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine. All of these phones are cell phones, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, no further questions. Laughter.
But you couldn't say, no questions, could you? Laughter. You came that close.
May the witness be excused, Your Honor?
You may step down. Just so the jury knows. The short delay. Our court reporter is still having problems with her computer. So in case nobody told you that, that's why we're having some lengthened recesses. It's not because I care about your recesses. Call your next witness.
Here she is, Jeanne Mulcahy.
Please remain standing. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
I do. Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record. Jeanne Mulcahy, Jeanne Mulcahy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. And which phone company are you here to testify about?
I'm with Cingular Wireless, and we also acquired AT&T Wireless, so both companies.
You purchased that with cash, right?
Yes.
Because 2 seconds equals 1 minute?
Sure, yes.
I placed in front of you exhibit number 53 and exhibit 453 and 454.
Uh-huh.
Have you been through those two exhibits prior to coming to court today?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And what is exhibit 453, please?
They're the records that were requested from AT&T Wireless.
Pursuant to search warrant?
Yes, sir.
Have you been through the contents of exhibit 453 to check it for accuracy?
Yes, sir.
Within exhibit 453, tab number 3, do we find the billing information, the bill, for one Paul Hugo?
Yes.
And within exhibit 453, tab 4, do we find the billing information for MJJ Productions, Miko Brando?
Yes.
And under tab 5, is the account information there for Rudy Provencio?
Yes.
Under tab 6, is there subscriber information for MJJ Productions, Paul Hugo and Rudy Provencio?
Yes.
And under tab 7, are those records for tolls of MJJ Productions, Miko Brando?
Yes. And
under tab 9, do we find some billing and financially labeled party information for the following people or entities? MJJ Productions, Miko Brando.
Yes.
MJJ Productions with 5 telephone numbers associated?
Yes.
And 3 entries for one Evie Tavashi with telephone numbers ending in 8984, 4676 and 9111?
Yes.
Okay. Are the records contained within Exhibit 453 kept in the normal course of business?
Yes, they are.
Are the entries within Exhibit 453 made at or near the time of the events they purport to record?
Yes.
And does AT&T Wireless rely on these documents in the performance of their business?
Yes.
With respect to Exhibit 454, are the documents contained within 454 Cingular Wireless records?
Yes.
And are they records for the following 2 individuals, Ann Kite under tab number 1?
Yes.
Evie Tavashi at tab number 2?
Yes.
Okay. Now, prior to the merger of AT&T and Cingular, excuse me, one bought the other, right?
Yes.
Which agency did you work with?
AT&T Wireless.
AT&T Wireless. Okay. Are you familiar with the Cingular Wireless records?
Yes, I am.
And their billing cycle?
Yes.
And is it with respect to that knowledge that you come here and testify as a custodian of the records that have the Cingular label on them?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are these records also kept within the normal course and scope of the business of AT&T Wireless, Cingular?
Yes.
And with respect to the documents in 454, are they recorded at or near the time of the events?
Yes.
And does Cingular, AT&T rely on these documents in the regular course of their business?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time we would offer 453 and 454 into evidence.
Same request, Your Honor.
All right, they're admitted with the same provision.
If you could please turn to Exhibit 454, tab number 1, and what appears to be labeled, Field Usage, for 1 and Kite. May I have the Elmo, please, Your Honor? I'm just going to lay this on the projector.
I think you have to open it.
I keep thinking it's a copy machine. Okay, can you just give us an example of how you would read this bill across, from left to right, please, top line?
The first area is the number, and then the electronic serial number, rate plan, an abbreviation of the amount, called locations, description, whether it's incoming, or the number that was dialed if it was outbound, the date, the time, duration, and charges, and the roamer system that was being used to process calls.
Okay, do you know what the codes are for three-way calling if they're available for these mobile phones?
I believe it's usually 3W.
3W, three-way.
Yes.
Makes more sense than an O, right?
Yes.
I'd like you to turn to Exhibit 453, please. I'd like to show you a different format bill. Why don't you turn to page 1 of the Paul Hugo account under tab 3? I'll lay this on the Elmo. And these records appear to be in a different format, correct?
Correct.
Could you explain to us, please, just starting at item number 1, what the columns mean across?
Sure. It's the date, the time of the call, the number called, the general area that the call was placed to, quantity of minutes, the rate that was charged, and just the charge description.
And the calling plan?
Yes.
Is the code for a three-way call on this bill also 3W, or is that different?
I believe so.
Okay, could you please turn to the next page on the Paul Hugo exhibit?
Yes.
Are there sections of your bills which indicate where a party may be while they're placing phone calls using these wireless phones?
I don't believe on this bill.
Are you looking at what I'm looking at?
Oh, I'm sorry. Under the roamer usage, yes, that's the detail of when you're roaming. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to guess this means the phone was in Brazil.
Correct.
And on item number 2, does that entry mean that while in Brazil, this number called, on March 2nd at 6:05 p.m., the phone number 201-233-0063?
Yes.
Okay, if I could show you just one more format bill. Please turn to tab 4. And is that the service information and toll record for MJJ Productions, service user Miko Brando?
Yes.
If you could turn to what is marked as page 48. I believe it's the first page in that exhibit.
Yes.
Okay, and yet another way to track phone calls. Is that in the same format, just spaced differently?
Yes, it's the same format.
And is the first group of numbers the phone number of the user?
Yes.
Okay, and then the fourth column in from the left, or, actually, the next phone number you would see would be the number dialed, correct?
Yes.
And then the date and the time entry in the middle of this bill now, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Miss Mulcahy. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Counsel?
No questions. Laughter.
Doesn't get any better than that. Laughter. Call in your next witness. Thank you. You're excused.
Call Deborah Rowe to the stand.
Come to the witness stand, please. When you get to the witness stand, please raise your right hand, face the clerk.
Yes, I do. Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record. Deborah, Deborah. Rowe, Rowe. Jackson, Jackson. Thank you.
May I proceed?
You may.
Do you prefer to be called Miss Rowe?
Debbie, please.
Alright, but in court, we're a little more formal.
Oh,
In terms of surnames, do you go by Miss Rowe?
yes.
Do you know the defendant, Michael Jackson, seated to my right with the long, dark hair?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Mr. Jackson?
We've been friends and we were married.
When were you married to Mr. Jackson?
From 1997 to 1999.
Alright,
Sorry.
the acoustics are not quite what they could be in this courtroom, so you have to stay close to the microphone and keep your voice up. Is that alright?
Okay.
Alright, you were married to Mr. Jackson between which periods of time again, please?
I believe 1997 to 1999.
For what period of time did you know Mr. Jackson prior to that?
Probably 20 years or more.
Were you friends with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Are you the mother of his 2 children?
Yes, I am.
The 2 oldest children?
Yes, I am.
And their names are what?
Michael Joseph Jackson Jr. and Paris Michael Catherine Jackson.
And when were you divorced from Mr. Jackson?
I believe October 1999.
Did you ever live with Mr. Jackson during the course of your marriage?
We never shared a home.
Did you live with Mr. Jackson prior to that marriage?
We never shared an apartment.
At the time that the marriage was dissolved, was there an understanding or an agreement as to child custody?
I'm sorry?
Was there an understanding or agreement as to child custody?
Yes.
And who had custody of the 2 children?
Michael did.
Did you have visitation of the 2 children?
Yes, I did.
And what was the extent of the visitation as determined by that divorce?
Every 45 days for 8 hours.
Alright, did you, in fact, see the 2 children every 45 days for 8 hours?
I tried.
Alright, were there difficulties in being able to do so?
Yes.
What kinds of difficulties?
There were times that the children and Michael would be out of the country, and I was working at the time, and if they were in South Africa, I would not have enough time to fly to where they were and then return home in time to be at work.
Were you able to make up that 8-hour period when they returned?
No, it was pushed off until the next 45 days.
For what period of time did that continue, that custody arrangement?
I believe a year and a half.
At some point in time, did you voluntarily agree to give up parental rights as to those 2 children?
Yes.
And when was that, can you tell us?
I believe 2001.
And why did you do that?
The visitations were not comfortable. We were hooked up at a hotel. When I would bring things to do, finger painting, coloring or whatever, the nanny was always very concerned with the children getting dirty. I would bring t-shirts or something to put over their clothes, and the environment was very sterile. It wasn't a quality relationship.
Did you ask to have more time with the kids?
Yes.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. The answer was, yes.
I'm sorry.
Next question. That's all right.
And was that request granted?
No.
And tell me why you made the decision to give up parental rights as to the 2 children at that time.
I didn't believe that.
Objection. Relevance. Opinion.
Sustained.
At some point in time, when was the last time that you saw the 2 children?
2.5, 3 years ago. I'm not sure. I don't remember the dates.
Did you receive a call from anybody in the early part of February of 2003 requesting your assistance on behalf of Michael Jackson?
Yes.
Objection. Leading.
I'm sorry.
Overruled. You may. It's answered, yes. Next question.
From whom was that telephone call?
Originally.
Objection. Hearsay.
I asked who it was.
Overruled. You may answer as to who it was.
Originally my former boss's partner called me and said that I needed to call my old boss. That he needed to speak with me. That Michael needed my help with something.
Who was the old boss you're referring to?
Arnold Klein.
What kind of work was that you were doing for Mr. Klein?
He's a dermatologist. I was an assistant for him.
For what period of time were you his assistant?
From 1979 to 2000 or 2001.
What kind of work did you do for Dr. Klein?
I assisted him with surgeries and patients.
Without getting into the content of that telephone call, did you, in fact, call Dr. Klein?
Yes, I did.
And did you have a conversation with him?
Very brief.
Did that conversation lead to a conversation with yet another person?
Yes. He wanted me to speak with Mark Schaffel.
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Stricken.
That conversation led to a conversation with yet another person, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Who was that person with whom you then had a conversation?
Mark Schaffel.
Do you know Mark Schaffel?
Not before this conversation.
Was that the first time you had ever spoken with Mr. Schaffel?
Yes.
Prior to that conversation, did you know who he was?
No.
Had you ever heard his name prior to that day?
No.
Did you, in fact, call Mark Schaffel?
The call was placed between Dr. Klein and myself.
All right.
I don't hand out my phone number.
Ultimately, Mark Schaffel contacted you, or Dr. Klein arranged the conversation. How was that?
Correct. Dr. Klein arranged the conversation. I did not feel comfortable with a three-way and told Mr. Schaffel that I would call him if he gave me his number.
All right. Did Mr. Schaffel, in fact, have a conversation with you?
Yes, he did.
Do you recall when that conversation took place?
It was early in February, in the morning.
And what was the nature of that conversation?
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Would you tell us if, prior to that conversation, were you aware of a documentary that was titled, Living with Michael Jackson?
No.
Were you aware of a person by the name of Martin Bashir?
No.
As a consequence of this conversation with Mark Schaffel, did you then have a conversation with the defendant?
Yes.
And how long after your conversation with Mr. Schaffel was your conversation with Michael Jackson?
Probably 30 minutes.
Who called who?
They called me back, because they could not get a hold of Michael immediately.
Objection. Non-responsive. Hearsay. Move to strike.
Non-responsive. Who called who is the question.
Right.
All strike the answer.
Were you contacted by somebody with regards?
Mark Schaffel, yes.
Mark Schaffel called you?
And Ronald Konitzer.
You then had a conversation with Ronald Konitzer as well?
For a brief moment, Michael was with him.
Did Michael Jackson then get on the telephone?
Yes, he did.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
What did Mr. Jackson say to you in the course of this conversation?
He told me there was a video coming out, and it was full of lies, and would I help? And I said, as always, yes. I asked him if he was okay. I was very upset.
When was the last time you had talked with Michael Jackson?
The day of our divorce.
And how long prior to that, to this conversation you're now referring to, was that day of your divorce?
October 12th.
Of what year, please?
99.
All right, so we're now talking about February of 2003, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, he asked you for some kind of assistance, is that correct?
Yes.
What exactly did he ask you to do, if anything?
He asked if I would work with Ronald and Dieter to help him, and I said yes. And I asked him how he was. I asked him how the children were. And I asked if I could see them when everything settled down.
What did he tell you?
He said yes.
All right. Had you had any communication with Mr. Jackson in the preceding period of time with regards to the children?
No.
Had you sent any letters to him at all requesting that you be able to see them at some point in time?
No.
Did you want to see the children?
Very much.
All right. The conversation that you had with Mr. Jackson over the telephone, did he tell you from where he was calling?
No. I was told by Mark that they had to call Europe.
Objection. Hearsay. Non-responsive. Move to strike.
It's non-responsive. Stricken.
You had mentioned that Ronald Konitzer had called back, is that correct? Did I get that right?
Mark Schaffel called me back. Ronald had called Mark, or Mark had called Ronald. I don't know who placed that call.
At some point in time you actually spoke with Ronald Konitzer?
Yes.
Did you know Mr. Konitzer prior to that day?
I think I met him years ago when Michael was on tour. He said that I had met him. I didn't remember. I didn't have a face and I didn't recognize the voice.
Alright, and did you carry on, without getting into the content of the conversation, did you, in fact, have a conversation with Mr. Konitzer before your conversation with Michael Jackson?
He just said, Michael needs your help.
Objection. Non-responsive. Hearsay.
The question is, yes, or, no.
Yes.
Sustained.
Sorry.
The conversation that you had with Michael Jackson was approximately how long in length?
2.5 minutes, maybe.
Were you at home at that time?
Yes, I was.
You said that you had asked him how he was and how the children were.
Yes.
What did he tell you specifically about whatever it was, the performance that was coming on television or the documentary? How did he describe it to you?
Objection. Leading and assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained as to assuming facts.
What did he tell you about what was going to happen?
That there was a bad video coming out. He didn't go into any more detail about that.
Did you ask him what it was about?
No.
Did you ask him if it dealt with him personally, Mr. Jackson?
I assumed it did.
Okay. Now, he asked you for some assistance, is that correct?
Objection. Asked and answered.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And did he describe to you in any detail or particularity what it was he wanted you to do?
No, he did not.
Okay. Did he tell you to follow anybody's direction?
He asked me.
Objection. Leading.
I'm sorry.
Sustained.
What did he tell you to do?
He asked me to work with Ronald, Dieter and Mark.
Alright, you just told us about Ronald. Is Dieter somebody you knew prior to that day?
I don't remember.
Do you know Dieter's last name?
Weisner or Weiser.
Okay. And you don't recall at this time whether you had ever met him prior to that date, the time of that phone call?
No.
Now, did you ask any directions as to how you were going to work with him or what you were going to do?
I told them that I needed a release of confidentiality, and that until that was done, I wouldn't be able to do anything.
You told Mr. Jackson that?
No, I'm sorry, I told Mark Schaffel, Dieter and Ronald.
Alright, let's go back to the conversation again with Mr. Jackson.
Okay.
Before you hung up the phone or before your telephone conversation ended, you said specifically about the children. Tell me what it was that he told you about the children with regards to visitation.
Objection. Asked and answered.
Overruled. You may answer.
Go ahead.
When, I said, are you okay? Are the children okay? And he said, yeah, we're okay. And I said, can I see you and everything, and the children when everything is over with? And he said, yes.
Did you want to see Mr. Jackson and the children?
Absolutely.
Did he give you any other direction as to when that might be?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
No.
Did that conversation end at that time, or was there anything else that you discussed in the course of that conversation?
Michael and I?
Yes.
No, we didn't discuss anything else. The phone was handed back to Ronald.
Alright, your conversation then continued with Ronald?
Correct.
Alright, what was asked of you at that point by Ronald?
Objection. Hearsay.
As explaining her conduct thereafter, not for the truth of the matter.
All right, I'll allow the hearsay for that limited purpose.
What was explained by Ronald thereafter?
That they were going to do a special, I don't know if they used the word, rebuttal, to counter whatever this video was.
And what was asked of you?
Would I help?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
And leading.
Was anything said by Mr. Weisner as to your involvement?
What? I don't understand. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the telephone call that continued, maybe I'm confused. Was it Konitzer or was it Weisner?
Konitzer.
It was Conitzer, all right. Ronald Conitzer. What exactly was it that Mr. Conitzer then said to you about what you were supposed to do?
Objection. Hearsay.
2.
Assumes facts not in evidence.
Again, to explain.
Sustained.
Was there a conversation with Mr. Conitzer at that point about anything that you were then going to do?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
That was overruled?
Yes.
Go ahead and answer.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
I'll have the court reporter read it back to you.
Thank you.
Was there a conversation with Mr. Conitzer at that point about anything that you were then going to do?
I was supposed to work with Mark Schaffel, and that was when I told them that we had to have the paperwork done.
Objection. Non-responsive.
The second part of the answer all strike. Leave the first part in.
All right. With regards to working with Mark Schaffel, was there any other statement that was given to you by Mr. Conitzer at that time?
Objection. Leading.
Hardly suggests the answer.
Overruled. You may answer.
That I would be working with Mark on whatever project that had been decided.
All right. Did you, in fact, then have a conversation with Mark?
Yes.
When did that conversation take place? Mark Schaffel.
After the connection was broken between Michael and Ronald and myself.
That same day?
It was the same conversation. Mark had us on 2 lines. So when he hung up the one line, Mark and I were still on another line.
Was Mark Schaffel part of the conversation that you had with, in other words, was it a conference call between Mark and you and Ronald Conitzer?
Correct.
So he was privy to the conversation that was taking place at that point?
He set it up.
All right. Was he part of the conversation while you were talking with Mr. Conitzer? In other words, did he periodically say things as well?
I don't remember.
What did Mr. Schaffel want you to do?
Objection. Hearsay. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Same exception.
Foundation. Sustained.
In the course of this conversation, did Mr. Schaffel make requests of you?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Nothing specific. I couldn't discuss anything at that point.
Did you advise him that you needed to do something?
Yes.
And what was that?
We needed to agree on a confidentiality release between Michael and myself.
Was there such an agreement that you had between you and the defendant?
Eventually.
Well, prior to this conversation, was there some kind of a confidentiality contract that you had with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And when did you and Mr. Jackson enter into that agreement?
At the time of our divorce.
And did that restrain you from having conversations with people about something or other? What did it restrain you from doing, this confidentiality agreement?
Objection. Foundation. Leading. Relevance.
Sustained.
Did you know what the confidentiality agreement was? Have you ever read it?
Yes.
And you read it at or about the time that you entered into this divorce with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I did.
All right. Did that confidentiality agreement keep you from doing something?
Yes, it did.
What did it keep you from doing?
Objection. Foundation. Leading. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
352.
Go ahead and answer the question.
The confidentiality agreement said that I could not speak with the press, public, anyone, regarding Michael or the children or our lives together.
Were you able to get an exemption from that agreement?
Yes.
Did you have an attorney working on that?
Yes.
What is your attorney's name?
Iris Joan Finsilver, F, as in Frank, Insilver.
Has Miss Finsilver been your attorney for some time?
Yes.
Did she represent you in your divorce with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, she did.
Ultimately, when that exemption was executed, were you then able to speak with Mr. Schaffel about what you were expected to do?
Yes.
And what was it that you were expected to do?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation.
Sustained.
All right. Did you have a conversation with Mr. Schaffel after the execution of this exemption?
Yes.
All right. In the course of that conversation, were you told things by Mr. Schaffel with regards to doing something on behalf of Michael Jackson?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
What did Mr. Schaffel tell you in this conversation?
Objection. Hearsay.
For the same exception.
All right. Overruled.
Go ahead.
That we would be doing an interview.
Did he tell you where or when?
He said that it would probably be at his home in Calabasas and within 2 or 3 days of when everything was settled.
All right. Now, when was it exactly that you had this conversation with Mr. Schaffel about doing the interview relative to this first phone call from Mr. Jackson?
Do you mean when we were going to do it? Or when we scheduled it?
When you scheduled it.
We didn't schedule it till after the documents had been signed.
Okay. And how long did that take before you were able to create and sign documents?
I would like to say that it was probably only 2 days. It seemed a lot longer. There was a lot of faxing back and forth.
Was there some urgency in doing it soon?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Did anybody ask you to do it at a particular time?
Mr. Schaffel.
What did he say with regards to that?
As soon as he could arrange.
Hearsay.
Same exception.
Overruled. You may answer.
As soon as he could arrange to have whatever he needed, I believe, for the interview.
And was there a date finally set for the interview?
Yes.
Do you know what that date was?
I don't know exactly. Beginning of February, I believe.
Are you aware as to when or if the screening of Living with Michael Jackson ever actually aired in the United States?
I know that it aired. I don't know when it aired. I didn't watch it.
Do you know when, relative to the airing of that production, your interview took place?
I know in relation to when it took place in Europe, but not here.
When did it take place relative to the European airing?
The day before I gave my interview.
Did that interview take place at Mr. Schaffel's residence?
My interview?
Yes, your interview.
Yes, it did.
Can you tell us who was present during that interview?
Hamid, who is Michael's photographer, Rudy, Christian, Mark, Stuart Backerman, who I think was Michael's PR person, and Iris came with me.
Up until the time that you arrived at Mr. Schaffel's home to do this, had Mr. Schaffel told you that you would get any benefit from doing this interview?
Objection. Leading and hearsay.
I'm sorry?
Sustained.
Were you going to be paid for this interview?
No.
Were any promises made at all?
Just that I.
Objection. Leading and hearsay.
Sustained.
And vague.
Hearsay. Sustained. Hearsay.
On hearsay. We would offer it again as to tending to explain her actions and her response, and not for the truth of the matter stated.
The objection sustained.
Did anybody offer you anything in response to your doing this?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Do you mean quid pro quo?
Yes.
No, I was excited to see Michael and the children when all this was over.
Why did you do this interview?
I promised him that I would always be there for him and the children.
Did anybody mention your children in the course of either doing this interview or leading up to the interview?
Objection. Asked and answered and leading.
Overruled.
You can answer that question.
Can you explain what you mean?
Did anybody mention anything about your children with regards to, relative to this interview?
Objection.
Leading up to the interview or during the course of the interview?
Vague. Compound. And leading and foundation.
Rephrase. It's an extended question now.
Alright. Specifically, you had conversations with Mr. Schaffel, did you not?
Yes.
Prior to the interview?
Yes.
Did you have a number of conversations prior to the interview?
No.
How many conversations did you have with him prior to the interview?
One to set up the day and time, and one for directions on how to get to his house.
Alright. Prior to actually arriving at his house, did he talk to you about your children at all?
He said the kids were fine, that Michael was going to be okay.
Alright. Did he make any representations to you about visitation?
Objection. Leading. Foundation. Hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
When I expressed excitement for seeing the children and for seeing Michael again and possibly reconnecting, he seemed to be very happy.
Alright. During the course of your being at the house conducting this interview, did you talk with Mr. Schaffel any further about your children?
Yes.
All right. What did he say with regards to your children while you were at his house?
Objection. Hearsay.
Same exception. I will add also it's a statement in furtherance.
I reject that as a reason, but let me look. All right, I'll allow the question for the limited purpose of explaining her action after that. Do you want the question read back?
I can't see that far. Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, what did he say with regards to your children while you were at his house?
That they were fine. That Michael was going to be okay. That it was. He was happy for me that we were all going to get to see each other again. And how big the kids have gotten. And how beautiful they were. And how strong-headed Paris is in. About like me.
What was your expectation with regards to your children in terms of your completing this interview?
Objection. Leading. Foundation.
Sustained.
Did you have any expectations with regard to your kids at all?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Yes.
What was that? What were your expectations?
To be reintroduced to them and to be reacquainted with their dad.
You wanted to be reacquainted with Mr. Jackson as well?
Yes.
Why?
He's my friend.
Let me ask you about the interview. For what period of time were you at Mr. Schaffel's home?
I was at his house about 10.5 hours, but the taping was about 9.
Was your attorney with you?
Yes.
The entire time?
She stayed downstairs when Ian Drew arrived. And I was concerned about someone being able to say that.
Objection. Non-responsive and hearsay.
Sustained.
The question was whether or not she was there the entire time. Was there a period of time?
She was in the house.
Okay. She was in the house, but at some times not with you?
Correct.
All right. Now, prior to the start of this interview, had you talked with anybody about the content of this interview? In other words, what was going to be asked of you?
No.
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence, leading and foundation.
Overruled. Do you want the question read back?
No. No, I did not want that.
Did you know what it was you were going to be saying?
No.
Did you know what it was? The questions. What questions would be asked of you?
No.
Did you know whether or not it had anything to do with this video or this television show?
All I knew, it was whatever was being put out about Michael could be hurtful to him and the children, and I don't know if I was supposed to run interference. I don't know what the basis was for my interview.
Did you ask him about the content of the television show?
No.
Did you ask anybody about the content of the questions that would be put to you?
Absolutely not.
Did you know that it would be questions put to you? In other words, it would be in the format of an interview?
Yes.
Who had told you that?
Mr. Schaffel.
Who was present at the time when this interview commenced?
Iris. Stuart. Rudy. Christian was in and out. It was either Christian or Rudy that was in and out. Mark. Myself. And Ian Drew.
Iris is Iris Finsilver, your attorney?
Yes.
Stuart is who?
Stuart Backerman, I was told, was a spokesperson for Michael.
Had you ever seen Mr. Backerman prior to that day?
No.
Had you ever heard his name prior to that day?
No.
Were you introduced to him that day?
Yes.
Did you actually have a conversation with him?
Nothing other than, nice to meet you, and very casual. Nothing important to say.
You said Rudy. Who is Rudy?
He was Mark's go-fair boy.
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled.
Marks, say that again?
Go-fair boy.
Go fair? Somebody who did things for Mr. Schaffel.
Yes.
Do you know Rudy's last name?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
Do you recall if you were told his last name at any time?
No, I was. I was introduced to everyone on a first-name basis. I knew Hamid from before.
All right. Rudy was or was not somebody you knew prior to that day?
No.
Christian, if I'm reading my handwriting correctly.
Yes.
Was the name you mentioned?
Yes.
Was Christian somebody you knew prior to that day?
No.
Was his name given to you at that time?
I don't remember if I was introduced to him or if someone had said, Christian will get it. I knew it was his name, because I don't remember being formally introduced to him.
Alright, you don't recall an acquaintance with him prior to that day?
No.
You mentioned Ian Drew.
Yes.
Who is Ian Drew?
He was someone that was going to interview me.
And was he somebody you knew prior to that day as well?
No.
Did you have any preliminary conversation with him prior to the commencement of this interview?
Absolutely not.
Was that by your choice?
Yes.
And why is that? Why was that?
Objection. Foundation. 352. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Go ahead.
Because I didn't want anyone to be able to come back to me and say that my interview was rehearsed, that someone told me what to say. Mr. Jackson knows no one can tell me what to say. I tend to speak my own mind, and I didn't want the interview to be construed as something other than what it was, which was a cold interview.
At some point in time, were you given any kind of a list of questions?
Objection.
Overruled.
It was offered to me and I declined it.
Alright, who offered you the list?
Ian Drew.
Why did you decline it?
Again, it was a cold interview, and I wanted to keep it that way.
Was anyone else in the room during the course of the interview?
Everyone was. Rudy and Christian were in and out, but the main people who were there was Hamid, Iris, Stuart, Mark and myself.
Alright.
And Ian.
Did you know Hamid prior to that?
Yeah, I did.
Was that Hamid Moslehi?
Yes.
And you recognized him when you got there?
Oh, yes.
He had been Mr. Jackson's videographer for some time?
Yeah, for a long, long time.
Was the location of this interview in Calabasas, California?
Yes.
Do you happen to know the date?
It was the day before that documentary was to air. I don't know the date.
Miss Rowe, in the course of the interview that took place, I think you said over about the next 9 hours.
Yes.
Were you truthful in the answers that you gave?
Can you rephrase that?
Did you tell the truth? Did you answer all those questions truthfully and honestly?
No.
Alright, why is that?
Objection. Foundation. Opinion. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
Why is that?
Because my personal life is my personal life and no one's business. And it pretty much doesn't matter. I could call something black. In the media, it will be called white.
Do you remember the questions that you were asked?
Not all of them.
Do you remember some of the questions that you were asked?
I would have to see the tape again.
Did you have an opportunity to review the tape recently?
Yes.
Alright, how many hours of tape did you review?
To scan over? It was probably 2.5 hours of it, but I wasn't really paying attention. I found myself very boring and dull.
Do you mean as the subject matter of the tape?
Yeah.
It went for, I think you said, about 2.5 hours?
That I saw. I think it was a 3-hour tape, but I didn't watch the entire video.
Do you have a belief as to whether or not it was an edited version of what had taken place?
It had to be. It was a 9-hour interview. And if there's only 3 hours, there's 6 hours someplace.
Were you asked questions about Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I was.
Objection. Leading. Hearsay.
Overruled.
What questions that were asked of you about Mr. Jackson did you not give honest answers to?
Can you be more specific?
I can. Did he ask? Were you asked questions about Mr. Jackson and his parenting of your 2 children?
Objection. Leading. Move to strike.
Overruled.
Did you understand the question? Would you like to hear it again?
Yes, I was asked the question.
May the court reporter repeat the question, Your Honor?
I think she understood the.
I understood the question, and I said, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She answered your question.
I'm sorry. Were those the questions, or among the questions, that you did not answer honestly?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
When was the last time you had actually seen Mr. Jackson related to your 2 oldest children?
The day that we signed our divorce papers.
Did you have any information at all about his parenting skills with your children?
Yes, I did. When I was seeing the children, I spoke with the nannies before we divorced. I saw him with the children. I've seen him with the kids the whole time I've known him.
Counsel, we'll take our afternoon break. Before we break, I just want to ask you a question, Mr. Sanger.
Yes, sir.
Would you stipulate that the phone records could be released so they can be redacted as I ordered?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'll release the phone records that went in evidence today to the district attorney so they can be redacted and returned to the court immediately.
I take it they'll give me the copy of the redacted.
And you're ordered to give the defense a copy of the redaction. Thank you. We're in recess until tomorrow morning. And I'll see you at 8:30.
Mr. Sanger, can we talk with him for a second?
If the judge wants us.